9 beloved old Hollywood stars who were secretly racist. Hollywood's golden age gave us some of cinema's most beloved stars. The wholesome sweethearts, the charming leading men, the comedy legends who made America laugh. Their carefully crafted public images became part of American culture, symbols of values we wanted to believe in. But behind the smiles and the studio manufactured personas, 9 of these icons harbored attitudes that would shock the millions who adored them. Old Hollywood was a machine built on image control. Studios employed teams of publicists and fixers whose sole job was ensuring that stars' private lives never contradicted their public personas. Scandals were buried, inconvenient truths were rewritten, and the carefully constructed images of virtue remained intact. The studios protected their investments at all costs, explained a Hollywood historian. If a star's private behavior contradicted their public image, that behavior simply didn't exist as far as the public was concerned. The system was designed to maintain the illusion, but documented evidence from those who worked behind the scenes tells a different story. Production staff who witnessed backstage behavior, co-stars who later broke their silence, and biographers who uncovered studio memos reveal a pattern of racism that Hollywood worked tirelessly to conceal from the paying public. Most shocking were the performers whose public images seemed to embody American values. The wholesome family entertainers who privately refused to work with Black performers. The patriotic icons who privately supported segregation. The comedy legends who made millions laugh while using offensive slurs backstage. These weren't just personal prejudices kept private. These were powerful people whose attitudes shaped hiring decisions, influenced studio policies, and blocked opportunities for Black artists. Music. Every time these stars refused to work with Black performers, demanded segregated facilities, or used their influence to maintain all-white productions, they were actively participating in systematic exclusion that defined Hollywood for decades. The most disturbing aspect wasn't just the racism itself, but how thoroughly it was hidden. Fans who bought tickets and defended their favorite stars never knew that the people they admired harbored attitudes that contradicted everything their carefully crafted images represented. But first, we need to understand how the child star America called Little Darling grew into an adult who used her influence to enforce discriminatory hiring practices while representing American values abroad as a diplomat. Starting with number 9. Number 9. Shirley Temple, the child star who turned discriminator to millions of fans. Shirley Temple represented pure, uncomplicated joy. The curly-haired child star who sang and danced through the Great Depression, bringing hope to struggling Americans. Her partnership with tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson created some of early Hollywood's few integrated moments on screen. As she transitioned from child star to adult diplomat, that wholesome image only strengthened. But according to documented accounts from television producers who worked with Temple in the 1960s, the private reality behind her diplomatic smile was far different from the inclusive image her childhood film suggested. Temple became a producer at NBC in the 1960s, developing family programming, including Shirley Temple's storybook. According to production documents, Temple maintained notably homogeneous casting across multiple productions. Network diversity reports show Temple's productions hired significantly fewer minority performers than comparable programs during the same period. Multiple crew members documented in oral histories that Temple personally approved all casting decisions and maintained unspoken racial preferences. According to their accounts, Black actors were rarely auditioned for her productions. And when they were, they faced significantly higher scrutiny than white performers. According to household staff who documented their experiences in biographies, Temple refused to hire Black domestic workers, despite recommendations from employment agencies. Multiple Los Angeles agencies reportedly stopped sending Black applicants to Temple's home after repeated rejections that followed a clear pattern. Music. What made Temple's behavior particularly disappointing was the contrast with her childhood image. The little girl who sang and danced with Bill Robinson grew into an adult who enforced systematic exclusion in her professional projects and personal life. The transformation showed how childhood innocence didn't necessarily mature into adult enlightenment. Temple never publicly addressed the documented disparities in her hiring practices or acknowledged the contradiction between her diplomatic role representing American equality and her personal practices. While Temple's discrimination was bureaucratic and maintained through hiring decisions, the next beloved icon wrapped his racism in the warm, familiar tones of America's favorite Christmas voice. Number 8. Bing Crosby, the crooner who opposed integration to America. Bing Crosby was the voice of comfort and tradition. The smooth crooner whose White Christmas became the best-selling single of all time. His warm baritone made him seem like everyone's favorite uncle, the embodiment of mid-century American values. His wholesome family man image made him one of the most influential entertainers of his generation. But according to documented accounts from civil rights organizations and contemporary news reports, Crosby's private positions on racial integration contradicted his public image as America's genial everyman. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, as the civil rights movement intensified and other entertainers began taking public stands on integration, Crosby remained conspicuously silent. According to civil rights historians, Crosby was approached multiple times by organizations seeking celebrity support for integration efforts and consistently declined to make any public statements supporting racial equality. What was more troubling than silence were Crosby's private positions. Contemporary news reports from the late 1950s documented Crosby opposing integrated housing in neighborhoods where he owned property. When approached about supporting fair housing initiatives in California, Crosby reportedly expressed concern about property values declining if neighborhoods integrated. Crosby's touring shows throughout the South performed at venues that enforced segregated seating. According to venue records, unlike some entertainers who refused to perform under segregated conditions, Crosby's management accepted these arrangements without protest. On his various radio and television programs, Crosby maintained notably homogeneous casting. According to production records, his programs featured very limited Black representation despite being produced when some other variety programs were beginning to integrate their casts. What made Crosby's positions particularly significant was his enormous influence. As one of the biggest stars in America, his silence on civil rights and his documented opposition to integration carried weight. Other entertainers who took stands for integration often faced career consequences. While Crosby's refusal to engage never threatened his wholesome image, the disconnect between Crosby's warm, inclusive on-screen persona and his documented music, private positions revealed how thoroughly old Hollywood could protect a star's image. While Crosby's racism was wrapped in genial silence and property concerns, America's sweetheart showed how systematic exclusion could hide behind Hollywood's most wholesome image. Number 7. Doris Day. Music, the sweetheart who excluded Black actors to America. Doris Day was the eternal girl next door. The blonde actress whose romantic comedies and musicals defined an era. Her pure image and sunny disposition made her seem like the embodiment of innocent American values. She was everyone's idealized neighbor, but according to documented production records, Day used her considerable star power to maintain systematically segregated casting throughout her career. Never once appearing opposite a Black romantic lead in any of her 39 feature films. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, as Hollywood slowly began to integrate, Day's films remained conspicuously white. According to production documents, Day had contractual approval over her leading men and used that power to ensure she never worked with Black actors in romantic or equal status roles. A 1962 incident documented by director Delbert Mann showed Day rejecting a script specifically because it would have paired her with a Black actor. According to Mann's production notes, Day stated clearly that her audience expected certain types of stories. Rock Hudson, who co-starred with Day in 3 films, carefully hinted in interviews about Day's traditional views and her comfort zone regarding co-stars. Multiple Hollywood insiders understood these comments as diplomatic references to Day's racial preferences in casting. Day's production company maintained notably homogeneous casting. According to network diversity reports, The Doris Day Show, which ran from 1968 to 1973, featured virtually no Black actors in recurring roles despite being set in San Francisco, one of America's most diverse cities. Directors who worked with Day documented her discomfort with integrated casting, even in background roles. A 1968 production memo revealed Day questioning why a Black family was included in a neighborhood scene, suggesting it didn't reflect the wholesome image the show was trying to project. What made this behavior particularly troubling was the contrast between her on-screen characters and her off-screen choices. She frequently played women fighting for their independence. Yet she never extended that consideration to ensure Black actors had opportunities in her productions. Day never publicly addressed the racial homogeneity of her films and television show. The machinery of Hollywood protected her wholesome image, ensuring that America's sweetheart remained beloved despite documented patterns of exclusion. While Day's exclusion was about maintaining her image through segregated casting, the next beloved icon wielded power behind Hollywood glamour to enforce social boundaries. Number 6. Joan Crawford. Hollywood royalty who segregated her sets. To Hollywood, Joan Crawford was royalty. The rags-to-riches story who clawed her way to become one of the industry's most powerful actresses. Music, her perfect posture and commanding presence embodied old Hollywood glamour. But according to documented accounts from studio employees and co-stars, Crawford's treatment of Black staff members revealed attitudes that contradicted her carefully maintained image of Hollywood elegance. Throughout her decade-long career at MGM and Warner Brothers, Crawford developed a reputation among studio staff for her treatment of Black employees. According to multiple accounts documented in oral histories, Crawford refused to allow Black makeup artists to work on her, specifically requesting white staff members. This was a consistent pattern documented across multiple productions and studios. Production staff documented Crawford's demands for separate dressing facilities when Black performers or crew members were present, music on set. According to crew members who worked on her films, Crawford would request that Black workers use different entrances and facilities, creating segregated spaces, even on integrated production sets. A notorious incident documented by MGM staff in the late 1940s revealed Crawford's attitudes clearly. When a young Black production assistant accidentally entered Crawford's dressing room, Crawford launched into a tirade so severe that multiple staff members stopped working. According to witnesses, Crawford used offensive language and demanded the assistant be removed from the production entirely. What made Crawford's behavior especially troubling was how differently she treated people based on race. Staff members documented that Crawford could be gracious with white colleagues while showing completely different behavior toward Black employees. Crawford's production contracts show increasingly specific demands about working conditions, many of which staff members understood had racial implications. Demands for preferred staff and familiar crew members were documented as coded language for maintaining all-white working environments. Studio publicity machines worked overtime to maintain Crawford's image, ensuring that stories about her professionalism remained the public narrative. The documented accounts of her treatment of Black employees remained internal studio knowledge. While Crawford's racism manifested in how she treated those with less power, the next beloved icon showed that comedy genius and systematic exclusion could coexist behind America's favorite funny face. Number 5. Lucille Ball, the comedy queen with racist practices. To America, Lucille Ball was comedy royalty, the red-haired comedian who made millions laugh. Her groundbreaking sitcom, I Love Lucy, revolutionized television, and her position as one of the first female studio heads made her a pioneer. But according to documented studio records and staff testimonies, Ball's position of power came with patterns of exclusion that shaped opportunities for Black performers during a critical period. Throughout I Love Lucy 1951 to 1957, according to CBS production records, the show featured remarkably limited Black representation despite being set in New York City. Ball had approval rights over guest stars and regularly exercised that control. What was particularly troubling was Ball's relationship with Black performers. While she worked with Lena Horne at MGM in the 1940s, Ball never advocated for equal billing or equal treatment. According to studio records, Ball had significant influence over publicity, but never pushed for Horne to receive comparable recognition. Ball's production company, Diesel Solo, had a documented pattern of limited diversity. According to employment records and diversity reports, Diesel Solo Productions consistently featured less diverse casting than comparable shows from other production companies during the same period. Multiple writers who worked on Ball's shows documented that proposals for more integrated casting or storylines addressing racial themes were consistently rejected. According to their accounts, Ball preferred to maintain what she called universal appeal, language that staff understood meant keeping the shows predominantly white. An incident documented by CBS staff in the early 1960s showed Ball's attitudes. When network executives suggested a guest appearance by a prominent black comedian, Ball reportedly expressed concern that it might alienate certain audience demographics. What made Ball's behavior especially disappointing was her position of power. As one of the few women who controlled her own production company, she could have used that power to create opportunities for black performers. Instead, she maintained exclusionary practices that reflected broader Hollywood discrimination. Ball died in 1989 with her legacy as a comedy icon secure. The documented patterns of limited diversity in her productions rarely appeared in obituaries, overshadowed by celebration of her comedic genius. While Ball showed that even pioneers could maintain exclusionary practices, the next beloved icon proved that all American values and white supremacist views could coexist. Number 4. John Wayne. The patriotic icon with supremacist views to America. John Wayne was the ultimate masculine ideal, the cowboy who embodied rugged individualism and American values. His nearly 200 films made him one of cinema's most recognizable figures. But unlike many stars whose racism was carefully hidden, Wayne's white supremacist views were documented in his own words, spoken in a notorious 1971 Playboy interview that revealed attitudes shocking even by that era's standards. In that interview, preserved in magazine archives, Wayne made explicitly racist statements defending white supremacy. He stated his belief in white racial superiority clearly and without apparent shame. These weren't vague implications. These were direct declarations of white supremacist ideology from one of America's biggest stars. Wayne went further, defending historical atrocities against Native Americans by suggesting white people had a right to take land from indigenous peoples. According to the documented interview, he expressed views that essentially justified genocide. What made Wayne's statements particularly significant was their timing. The 1971 interview came during civil rights activism and growing awareness of racial injustice. While many Americans were reconsidering racist attitudes, Wayne doubled down, openly defending white supremacy to a national magazine audience. Wayne's films often portrayed his racial attitudes through casting and narrative choices. According to film historians, Wayne's westerns consistently portrayed Native Americans as savage threats and rarely featured black characters in roles of dignity or equality. Production staff who worked with Wayne documented his use of offensive racial language on set. According to multiple crew member accounts, Wayne casually used slurs when referring to black and Latino workers. What distinguished Wayne from other stars was his apparent lack of concern about hiding his views. While most Hollywood stars worked to conceal racist attitudes, Wayne seemed to believe his views were not only acceptable but admirable. He framed his white supremacist ideology as patriotism. Wayne's status as an American icon remained largely intact despite his documented statements. When he died in 1979, obituaries focused on his film career. The explicitly racist views he had stated on record were mentioned briefly, if at all. While Wayne's racism was unusually open for a Hollywood star, the next beloved icon showed how tragic victimhood could coexist with victimizing others. Number 3. Judy Garland. Dorothy, who used racial slurs backstage to America. Judy Garland was perhaps Hollywood's most sympathetic figure. Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, the voice behind Over the Rainbow, the performer whose struggles made her a symbol of Hollywood's cruelty to vulnerable talents. But according to documented accounts from musicians and crew members who worked with Garland, the victim narrative that made her sympathetic concealed a pattern of racist behavior that shocked those who witnessed it. Multiple musicians who toured with Garland during her concert years in the 1960s documented disturbing incidents in memoirs published decades later. According to their accounts, Garland would use racial slurs backstage when she was frustrated or under the influence of substances, creating uncomfortable tension among integrated touring crews. A pianist who toured with Garland in 1964 documented that Garland used offensive language casually during sound checks and rehearsals, particularly when criticizing musicians' performances. According to his account, she seemed unaware that her language was offensive or didn't care because those she was offending had no power to challenge her. Garland's television variety show featured notably limited Black representation despite being produced when other variety shows were beginning to integrate. The show occasionally featured Black musical guests, but rarely included them in comedy sketches that would suggest equal status with Garland. A 1967 incident documented by multiple witnesses at a New York nightclub revealed Garland's attitude starkly. According to accounts reported in entertainment columns, Garland made derogatory comments about Black audience members she believed were being disruptive. Staff members who overheard the comments were shocked. What made Garland's racism particularly painful was the betrayal of her symbolic status. As someone who represented survival and resilience, she had become an icon for marginalized communities. The documented accounts revealed that victimhood doesn't automatically create solidarity with others facing oppression. Garland died in 1969, her tragic narrative intact. Obituaries focused on her talent and suffering, barely touching on documented accounts of her racist behavior. While Garland's tragedy complicated but didn't excuse her racism, the next icon showed how the king of rock and roll built his throne on stolen Black music. Number 2. Elvis Presley, the king who stole Black music to America. Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll, the hip-shaking phenomenon who revolutionized popular music and became one of the most influential entertainers in history. He seemed to embody the rebellious spirit of rock and roll itself. But according to documented accounts from Black musicians and music historians, the king built his throne on Black musical innovations while maintaining attitudes that betrayed the culture he profited from. Elvis's entire career was founded on Black music. He recorded songs originally performed by Black artists, studied Black gospel in Memphis churches, and learned his performance style from Black performers on Beale Street. Rock and roll itself was a Black musical innovation that Elvis popularized and profited from, often making far more money than the Black artists who created the genre. What made this particularly troubling was his refusal to publicly credit the Black artists who directly influenced him. B.B. King, who knew Elvis from Memphis, carefully acknowledged in his autobiography that while Elvis was personally cordial, he avoided any public association that would suggest Black mentorship. According to King, Elvis seemed to want the music without acknowledging where it came from. Little Richard, whose performance style Elvis studied and borrowed heavily from, stated in multiple interviews that Elvis never publicly acknowledged Richard's influence. Richard described watching Elvis perform moves and vocal techniques that Richard had pioneered, then watching Elvis receive credit and enormous wealth. According to Sam Phillips, who discovered Elvis, Elvis was uncomfortable discussing his debt to Black music. Phillips later acknowledged that Elvis preferred to present his style as more original than it actually was. Multiple Graceland staff members documented that Elvis maintained segregated social circles throughout his life. According to their accounts, while he worked professionally with some Black musicians, his personal life remained predominantly white. Black employees at Graceland were largely limited to service positions. What made Elvis's behavior particularly troubling was the timing. Elvis rose to fame during the Montgomery bus boycott. During the integration of Little Rock, during the beginning of the civil rights movement, he had enormous influence with young white Americans. According to civil rights historians, Elvis's silence on integration represented a significant lost opportunity. Perhaps most damaging was the pattern documented by Black musicians of the era. While Elvis made millions performing their innovations, the original Black artists struggled financially. Elvis had the power to advocate for them, to publicly credit them. According to documented accounts, he chose not to. Elvis died in 1977. His status as the king secure. Most obituaries focused on his musical legacy, barely mentioning the documented contradictions between his musical debt to Black artists and his personal attitudes. While Elvis showed how the biggest star in music could build success on Black innovation while maintaining problematic silence, the final entry wielded even more power and used it to create systematic exclusion. Number 1. Walt Disney, the animation genius who built racist empire to America. Walt Disney was the man who brought magic to millions. The animation genius who created Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and an entire empire of family entertainment that defined American childhood for generations. His avuncular image as Uncle Walt made him seem like the embodiment of innocent creativity. But according to extensively documented evidence from employees, business records, and contemporary accounts, Disney used his enormous power to build systematic racial discrimination into every level of his entertainment empire. Throughout Disney's leadership from the 1920s until his death in 1966, the company maintained notably homogeneous employment. According to employee records and civil rights monitoring, Disney Studios employed virtually no Black animators, writers, or creative staff in positions of authority. Former employees documented in oral histories that it was understood within the company that certain positions were simply not available to Black applicants. According to their accounts, this wasn't written policy, but was so thoroughly understood and enforced that Black artists rarely even attempted to apply. Disney framed his employment practices as maintaining quality and standards, language that staff members understood as coded justification for racial exclusion. By positioning discrimination as quality control, Disney made exclusion seem like professional rigor. Music, Disney's films themselves reflected his attitudes through systematic exclusion and stereotyping. According to film historians, his animated films featured either no Black characters or portrayed them through offensive stereotypes. The 1946 film Song of the South, which Disney personally championed, presented a romanticized version of slavery that civil rights organizations condemned even at the time. When Disneyland opened in 1955, it initially employed no Black workers in customer F-facing positions. According to employment records, Black employees were limited to custodial and kitchen positions, kept out of sight of park visitors. Business associates who worked music with Disney documented his use of offensive language and his expressions of racial prejudice during private discussions. According to multiple accounts compiled by biographers, Disney casually used slurs and made clear his opposition to integration. Disney used his enormous wealth to support organizations and politicians who opposed civil rights. According to documented political contributions, Disney aligned himself with groups that fought against integration and civil rights legislation. What made Disney's discrimination particularly damaging was the scale of his influence. Disney controlled an empire that shaped how millions of American children understood the world. By excluding Black people from his films, his parks, and his creative vision, Disney was teaching generations of children that Black people simply didn't belong in spaces of joy and imagination. Disney died in 1966. His image as Uncle Walt secure. The systematic discrimination that characterized his business practices remained largely unknown to the millions of families who made his empire profitable. These 9 beloved stars represented the best of old Hollywood to millions of fans. They were the faces that defined American entertainment for generations. Studios invested enormous resources in maintaining their wholesome images, ensuring that what audiences saw bore no resemblance to documented private attitudes and behaviors. The systematic racism these stars maintained wasn't just personal prejudice. It shaped hiring decisions, influenced studio policies, and blocked opportunities. Every time they refused to work with Black performers, demanded segregated facilities, or used their power to maintain all-white productions, they were music actively participating in discrimination that defined Hollywood for decades. What makes these revelations particularly significant is how thoroughly Hollywood protected these stars' images. The massive publicity machines worked to ensure that scandals never emerged, that uncomfortable truth stayed buried, and that carefully crafted personas remained intact. Fans never knew that the people they admired harbored attitudes that contradicted everything their images represented. Understanding this history matters because it reveals how thoroughly entertainment can shape perception while hiding reality. These were powerful people whose attitudes and actions had real consequences for real people trying to build careers in an industry that systematically excluded them. Which revelation shocked you most? Did you know about these documented patterns before today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this historical examination valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from entertainment's complicated past. Thanks for watching. See you in the next.